In the conceptual stage, the Force Unleashed video game, they started with a whole bunch of ideas, from playing as a bounty hunter to playing as a Wookiee, and George Lucas narrowed it down to Underworld and the rise of the rebellion. Then they thought maybe the protagonist is a rebel Jedi. No. Maybe the protagonist is one of the Emperor's hands? No. And finally settled on the protagonist being a dark Jedi trained by Vader to help him overthrow the Emperor, or so it seems. As with other multimedia projects, there were several ways in which Starkiller's story was told, and for the novel, they chose Sean Williams, who had previously written the Force Heretic trilogy and the New Jedi Order series. The Force Unleashed by Sean Williams ultimately made it to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list for the week of September 7th, 2008, and was ultimately on the list for 4 weeks. I think I remember when the video game was released in the fall of 2008. I'm pretty sure I saw commercials or gameplay or something, because I just remember thinking, wow, this playable character is very OP, but I honestly never sought out the novelization at all until recently. So first, a brief summary. Trained by Vader since childhood, the nameless agent called Starkiller knows nothing of his past, and his future is devoted to overthrowing the Emperor and ruling by Vader's side. But in carrying out missions for his master, he will travel to disparate worlds and make unlikely new allies that cause him to question both his tasks as well as his destiny. Now, The Force Unleashed, the video game, has different endings depending upon what track you take. The novel, though, follows what I would call the light side ending, as the dark side one ends with Vader dead, everyone else dead, and Starkiller now serving the Emperor. So the plot of the novel unfolds like this. In part 1, Vader tasks his apprentice, Starkiller, with tracking down and killing 3 different Jedi. Starkiller's not alone in his task, though, as he has a droid named Proxy who can create holograms of what he looks like and duel Starkiller, and his pilot is Captain Juno Eclipse, formerly a TIE fighter pilot who is now Starkiller's personal pilot of his ship, the Rogue Shadow. So Starkiller is dispatched to kill General Rom Koda on Nar Shaddaa. He doesn't kill Koda, but he does get his lightsaber. Then he's dispatched to the junkyard world of Raxus Prime to kill another Jedi, and finally to Felucia to kill Shaak Ti. He returns triumphant, only to be betrayed by his master and presumably killed. When part 2 opens, he was not killed. Vader saved him, and Vader now tasks him with stoking up dissent against the Empire, getting them all together in one place, and that's going to lead to them overthrowing the Emperor. At least that's what he tells Starkiller. So Starkiller goes to Cloud City to get General Rom Koda, who is blinded as the result of his fight with Starkiller. Then they go to Kashyyyk to help out Princess Leia Organa, and Starkiller crashes a skyhook and sees a vision of his past and possibly his future. They head to Felucia in search of Bail Organa, who is looking for Shaak Ti and has been imprisoned by her apprentice Maris Brood, who has fallen to the dark side as a result of her master's death. And thanks to Bail Organa's support, they ultimately end up on Corellia for a meeting between Mon Mothma, Garm Bella Bliss, and Bail Organa, which is gatecrashed by the Empire, who captures the senators and takes them to the Death Star, still in construction in orbit around the world of Despair. Starkiller and Juno Eclipse make their way to the Death Star. Starkiller finds that this was all a ploy between Darth Vader and the Emperor to find out who the rebels were and destroy them. Starkiller fights Vader, but he shows him mercy and does not kill him. only for Starkiller to die while the others escape. And as the book ends, they're on Kashyyyk, and they decide to make the symbol of the rebellion be a symbol of Starkiller's family, because it turns out Starkiller was the son of a Jedi. His name was Galen Marek. And so it ends up being Starkiller makes the rebellion, only he was scheming with Vader, and yeah, we'll get into that. So let's talk about the characters. We really only have two viewpoint characters in The Force Unleashed, and that is Starkiller and Juno Eclipse. I feel like of those two, I liked Juno the best because I felt like her dilemma that she's going through was pretty relatable for Star Wars, which is that she was raised to think that the Jedi were bad and the Republic had to be replaced with the Empire, and that the Empire is doing good things and keeping order. And it's not until she joins the Imperial Academy and then joins the Imperial Navy that she starts to question that. We're told that she was the youngest person to attend the Imperial Academy on Korulag, and that she's like the same age as Starkiller. And then when Starkiller encounters Leia Organa and it's like, oh, she's the same age as me, I started to be like, wait a minute, Juno, how old are you? And so in looking on Wikipedia, it seems that Juno entered the Imperial Academy when she was 14. And so at this point, during the events of the story, she is still a teenager. I was a little like, I don't know if I buy that. I don't know that I buy that, even with all the turnover within the Empire, that Juno would still be a captain by the age of like 16? I more so believe her backstory of what happened on the world of Kalos, where she was like, they're surrendering, you know, we can't keep killing them, and Vader's like, oh, well, attack the reactor core. And so she and her fighters did, and it ruined the entire planet. That was the first hints to Juno that maybe the Empire is not just about order, maybe it's also about control and power and fear, and that's not so much something that she can support. So whereas Starkiller is trying to get the rebels together because it's a order from his master, Juno is actively aiding him here because she believes that that's the right thing to do. She's seen the horrors of the Empire and she wants to stop it. I feel like her romantic subplot with Starkiller worked less well for me, and I think part of that is just because Starkiller is like kind of a blank slate video game protagonist. And especially since he doesn't know his past, he doesn't know his heritage or anything like that. All he knows is what Vader taught him. I guess I could understand attractive girl sees attractive guy and feelings ensue, but I don't really understand why, because Juno just seems like much more of a fleshed out person than Starkiller is. Starkiller, in comparison, is a lot more flat, which I guess you sort of accept from a video game protagonist, like a character you're playing as, because to a certain extent you're going to project yourself on them. But Starkiller doesn't know his past. Starkiller doesn't even know his own name. By the time he dies at the end, he has figured out his first name was Galen, but he doesn't even know his last name. And while we can sort of work out Starkiller / Galen's backstory, it's not until the very end of the book that they come right out and tell it, that he was the son of 2 Jedi Knights, that they were in hiding on Kashyyyk, that Darth Vader killed his father Kento, and then took Galen because he was powerful in the Force. That's the thing with Starkiller. Starkiller is sort of blank, but he is very, very strong in the Force. In fact, Galen's Force abilities are so far beyond anything that we've seen anywhere that the whole time I was like, I don't know if I buy this. And I think, again, video game adaptation, you have to accept that something that looks really cool and is fun to play in a video game may not necessarily make sense within the world of the books. And I think that's Galen here, where he uses the Force to pull down a Star Destroyer on Raxus Prime. An incredible feat. In Darksaber, we saw all of the Jedi on Yavin 4 working together to throw Daala's Star Destroyers away, and even that in the process killed Dorsk 81. Galen periodically has visions of the past and then what his future could be. And whereas Juno pretty much immediately is like, I want to side with the rebels, it's not until he's betrayed by Vader that he realizes this was a ploy between Vader and the Emperor, that he finally is like, oh yeah, I'm gonna really 100% be a rebel now. I don't think I could really blame him though, because if all he's known is what Vader taught him, yeah, he's probably gonna have a more tricky route to walk along than Juno Eclipse has. Of the Jedi that Starkiller faces off against, General Ramkoda was interesting, because at the end we find out that he knew what was up with Starkiller, he knew who he was, but you get no hint of that. He's either very good at playing the sad drunk, or he didn't really get it all together until close to the end. Since we're never in Koda's head, I'm not sure if I could really point either way, probably more the former, because it does seem like he's played a role. The Jedi on Raxus Prime is like very good with droids, and there is a very silly but very video game-esque fight in his constructed Jedi temple on Raxus Prime between him and Starkiller and droid versions of the Jedi Council. And then I just found Shaak Ti's death very sad, because Shaak Ti was supposed to die, I think, in Revenge of the Sith, but that never ended up making it into the film. So then they were like, oh, we need a really big draw for people to play The Force Unleashed. We'll have Shaak Ti in here, and this is how she actually dies. And I liked seeing her, and I liked that what she said made Starkiller question what he'd been doing to a certain extent, but it did feel a little bit like, really, you're gonna throw away Shaak Ti in a video game, in like one chapter of a video game novel? I thought she was bigger and better than that. I also, for some reason, had thought that Shaak Ti's apprentice was going to be a bigger part of the story than she actually was. We just barely see her in a Force flashback that Starkiller has after Vader betrays him, and then Starkiller fights her on Felucia, but shows her mercy, and she runs off. And I was like, oh, she's gonna show back up again, right? No, that's it. Leia Organa and Bail Organa and Mon Mothma and Bella Bliss are here, but they just feel like NPCs, especially Leia, where she's like, you must find my father. He went in search of Shaak Ti. And I'm like, ah, I see. You're giving the next quest. You're the NPC who gives quests. It's nice to see them, but you don't really get any sense of their character because they're more here to just spur the protagonist on to his next mission. And Vader's clearly thinking about overthrowing the Emperor, but I don't think he's ready to that point yet. In fact, I don't think he was really at that point until he found out about Luke's existence, and this is before A New Hope, so he may talk a good talk, but in the end, he's still gonna side with Palpatine. I do find it interesting that LucasArts was like, ooh, Palpatine's not scary enough, we'll make Starkiller Vader's apprentice, when I think Palpatine looks innocuous, but in the end, he scares me more than Vader does, because Vader is like visually imposing, whereas Palpatine is just like evil for evil's sake. So my first issue with The Force Unleashed was just how much the novel felt like a video game. And you're gonna go, well yeah, Meg, it's a video game adaptation. And I agree, but I feel like Hard Contact was a video game novel, in that it took the world of the video game and told a different story. And Shadows of the Empire was a video game novel in the fact that there was also a video game called Shadows of the Empire, but the novel felt more like a movie novelization than recounting what happened in a video game. And The Force Unleashed just really feels like a video game in novel form. I think it's the fact that part one is just 3 consecutive missions that Vader gives to Starkiller, and they're a little different, but they're all face down this Jedi and kill them and report back to me. And then I think too, the way in which part 2, which is Starkiller on his new mission, which is to get the rebellion together, again, more about that, We have that video game trick of returning to worlds we have seen before. So we go back to Felucia to rescue Bail Organa, and now Starkiller has to face off against Shaak Ti's fallen apprentice. And then we go back to Raxus Prime because we've got to destroy the shipyards because Rebellion needs to fight the Empire. And Cloud City may not be a new world to the video game, but it's a world we've seen before, and it's reintroducing us to Ram Koda after he's been blinded. It just felt a lot like each next plot event was so obviously a video game mission, and I'm pretty sure that the video game had some additional ones where Starkiller kept going back to Coruscant and fighting Sith or Jedi. Maybe Proxy was them. Again, I haven't really played the video game. This is just what I remember. Unfortunately, those are removed here. It's rather streamlined, but it just still feels like the game with a little bit of additional insights, but just the way that they move from world to world doesn't feel very novelistic here. Also on the video game thing, I like Juno's character, but I don't really understand why Starkiller needs a pilot. In the video game, you do need a character who's giving you information as you complete the level, and that's Juno, who flew you in, and she's now hacked into the system, and she's telling you stuff. But like, number one, if Juno was a TIE fighter pilot, how does she know how to hack into all these systems? And number two, if I were Vader, making myself a secret apprentice that no one else knows about, I would teach him how to fly ships so that he could fly his own ship. It just felt like Juno's role as the pilot and the information giver was very video gamey. My second issue with The Force Unleashed is just, the Force powers, which are probably really fun to play and look really cool in the video game, but Starkiller ends up being so overpowered here. He is pulling off force feats that we have rarely seen before, and this feels like even beyond what Vader and Luke can do, that I just sort of question the reality of that. And also, I feel like Ram Koda has to be pretending that he doesn't know what's going on if he's accompanying Starkiller on all these missions, and sure, he's staying on the ship, but he may be blind, but he still has the Force, and left and right, Starkiller is just throwing Sith lightning at people. But I think my biggest issue with The Force Unleashed is just the way that it depicts the formation of the rebellion. Contrary to what we've seen in all the other books, including the Han Solo trilogy, here the Rebel Alliance is formed by Starkiller, and it was actually a secret ploy by Vader and the Emperor to destroy the rebellion. And I'm like, okay, so then what's the point of what Bail Organa and Mon Mothma and Bella Bliss and all the other groups did if it was actually just like this secret twist planned by Vader and the Emperor, and that actually it was Starkiller, a character who up to now has not existed, and it was all him. He brought everyone together, and it wouldn't have been for him. And I'm like, I don't like this. Again, this sounds like good motivation for a video game, but then to make this like the canon explanation for how the rebellion got together, I feel like takes away all the credit from Mon Mothma and Organa and the others and puts it on like this blank slate video game protagonist. And in fact, he was being manipulated by Vader and the Emperor the whole time, so really it was their plan. And I hate the fact that the final fight is on the Death Star, that you want me to believe that Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and Bella Bliss were held on the Death Star? Again, I'm sure it makes for a very cool video game level, but I don't like it. I don't like the implications. So, in short, The Force Unleashed is a novel adaptation of the video game and carries a lot of the video game's quirks, for better or for worse. The novel is heavily focused on Juno Eclipse and Starkiller / Galen. I enjoyed getting to learn about Juno Eclipse, but Starkiller was just a little bit too much of a blank slate for me, and there's just like not enough personality there for me to find him interesting. The plot unfolds very much like a video game in that we have Starkiller carrying out his missions, and additionally Starkiller returning to worlds he'd visited previously for new missions. I don't like the twist that this story puts on the formation of the Rebel Alliance. I don't like that they're all on the Death Star at the end. And I feel like Starkiller's force powers are just way too much for a book. Cool to play, but when you read it, you're like, oh boy, this guy is really overpowered here. So next time, I'm going to be reading the second novel in the Coruscant Nights trilogy by Michael Reeves, Streets of Shadows.